Oh, welcome back to Odd Socks. It's a grey old day here, but I need to get on with planting some bulbs. Now, I showed you in the last video some of the things that I actually need to plant. Now, you may be aware that I want to introduce much more flowers here on our allotment. Now, I've gone a bit seed crazy this year and I have grown an awful lot of plants. I have grown cactus dahlias, salvias, rudbeckias. I've sowed cosmos, lobelia, and goodness knows what else. I really have gone full on it this year. Oh, and some liastrias too. Now, the liastris was liastris, however you pronounce it. I really am pants at that. Is something that I've grown from my own saved seeds of some of the bulbs that I actually got cheap last year. So, and they've germinated really well. Now, my intention here is to kind of mix the veg beds up to a certain degree with some flowers, but I also want to create some borders and some edges with lots of different plants and variations. Now, this is going to be an ongoing project. It will take me a while to do it, and each year I want to introduce another perennial of some sort here on the allotment. Now, it goes without saying, I'll be doing the sunflower seeds and I'll be doing some of that other stuff that we all do, like the marigolds and things like that. I've got nasturtium seeds that I've self-seeded all throughout the top of the plot at least. So I know I'll have a ton of those coming up very soon. But I did save some of the seed, but I'm going to dot it about here, there and everywhere. Now this year for me, it is all about pollination. Now, I don't like to use any kind of chemicals if I can get away with it. If that's what you like to do, then absolutely fine. You do what you want to do. But for me, I don't want to use slug pellets. I don't want to use sprays or chemicals. The only chemicals, so to speak, that I will be using is some fertilizers. But you can take that however you want. I'll be using chicken manure pellets and blood, fish and bone in some of the areas at least. But I want to create a natural environment where it brings in different types of predatory pollinators. Now, the pollinators are great to get, say, let's say your runner beans or your beans that you're growing. Introducing sweet peas in between those bean canes will really help get those runner beans and beans pollinated by those insects. Other things that I want to bring in are beneficial insects that will, say, eat the aphid or go for the whitefly or all those other things that actually cause us a lot of issues. I also want to try and deter as many slugs as possible. And now we haven't got as much wood around anymore. We've removed any plastic that we were using the previous year. I'm hoping not to use as many nets so the beneficial wildlife can get in there and actually get to those slugs. Now, I'm not using slug pellets and I'm not going to use any chemicals to control that, but I will be using my beer trap method, DE powder and manual picking. That's what I'm actually going to go for. And see if this year, if we don't have such a wet year, hopefully I can get a lot more crops than maybe last year when they were quite decimated in places, or we found them sleeping inside our cabbages. It's not going to happen this year. And that is famous last words. So I want to introduce these plants, these flowers, bulbs, whatever it is that I've got or I have been able to get onto my allotment. Now, I've bought some bulbs and things quite cheaply. Now, I've got aliums in the garden, some beautiful aliums, and I collected seed last year, but I didn't sow it late last year. I will sow it now, but it won't really be suitable for this year. It might take a couple of years from seed to actually form an actual flower, sometimes even longer. You can't guarantee that the plant will be the same from that seed as the original plant. Maybe that's it. So I've got some fresh anyway. Now, these were supposed to go in well, really by December, and I didn't do it because I've only just bought them. So if these actually grow this year, that's great. I'll be really happy. one of the other things that I really want to grow here in clumps is some gladioli. I love the strong striking stance of a gladioli, and the bees and butterflies. I seem to really like these. Well, they do in my garden anyway. I will be bringing in all the other seedlings and the plants that I've got growing probably over the next month, maybe 2 months. Some of them aren't very good in frost, so I'm going to have to be careful with that. Now, all these bulbs that I'm going to be planting, the biggest issue with them is rotting off, and the chances of me actually digging up any dahlias or bulbs or anything like that to store at the end of the year is going to be slim. So I'm going to have to be a little bit more careful. Now, if I get hold of a dahlia that is absolutely beautiful, I probably would dig that up and I would try and store it to save it. But I've never been able to store successfully without them rotting. But I just don't want the extra faff. So today I'm going to get these bulbs in and I'll show you roughly where I'm going to be sowing it. Now, this is my old kale bed, which is not going to be completely flowers, but I am going to introduce some flowers, and we're going to actually grow certain herbs in here this year. I've got some purple creeping thyme to go over the brickwork and along the edges, but I want to add some interest to this area. Yes, this bed does get a little bit wet because obviously I can't avoid it, we're on a slope, but it's nowhere near as wet as a little bit further down. So I'm going to plant some here. Now, I don't want some of the taller plants to be in the way as we're coming down with wheelbarrows and things like that. So I'm just really hoping that I can actually figure this out, where the best place to do it is. So some of the first ones I'm going to be doing is these bigger aliums. Now, these are about 15 centimetres down. And I like to clump my bulbs and plants together. Having just one lonely one on its own is a little bit sad. Now, I've only got 10 of these ones, so I'm going to put a clump here and then a clump somewhere else. Now, these have already started shooting because it's way past their time of actually trying to grow. So if these actually succeed, I'll be quite surprised. But I have done things like this before and it's worked out fine. It's a bit confused in the first year, but normally it sorts itself out. So let's get these ones in. Now, I wasn't sure whether I was going to grow any ornamental aliums down here because of our allium root miner issue. I've heard people say that they overwinter in these particular bulbs and can cause issues long term. But to be honest, where I've had that allium leaf miner last year, I've actually found it in the soil. So I don't actually think it needs these to overwinter. And anyway, if I'm growing leeks and things in here eventually, they're an overwinter plant. They'll survive and thrive in that environment. So I may as well have something that I don't have to worry about eating and just let it do its thing. Now, one of the other ones I'm going to get in here are these drumstick aliums. Now, these are a bit smaller, but they can go in between some of the others. Now, I probably should have let some of these, not covered some of these just yet, just so I can see where they are. But these are only going in 10 centimetres. Now, I'm only going to put a couple here because I have actually got quite a few things that I'd like to get into this bed. And I'm just going to lightly cover them over. Now, the rest of these I'll actually put in clumps around the allotment. Now, my gladioli are a different story. Now, they're going to be quite tall and they may block a little bit of light, so I've got to think about that carefully. But I think I've got an area. Now this area is an area that's up alongside our fence line. It has got incredible amount of rubbish and plastic in this bed. Now this is an area that we didn't do anything with at all last year, and it is heavy clay soil. There was just too much rubbish in there for us to contend with. It was just so bad. There was black bin bags in there that was filled with soil buried under the ground. You just can't make this stuff up. So we're going to turn this into our little wildflower area. Now I'm going to give it a rake down because it won't be long before we actually sow our wildflower seeds. Now I'm hoping they're going to be okay here. It is a little bit of a heavy soil, but we'll give it a go. I've always had quite good success with some wildflower mixes in the back garden when I've had an open area that I've wanted to cover for the season. And I think this would do really, really well. So I'm going to plant some of my gladioli bulbs here, and I'm going to just do them in little circles so it gives some really nice structure to the actual flower border. Now it's not just going to be wildflowers here, there is going to be a mix of other little bits and pieces, and even the wood chip paths that I'm standing on here. Now there'll be certain plants, maybe some dahlias or some of the bigger, stronger plants, that I'll actually move the wood chip to the side and actually plant directly below it. But I'll wait until some of my seedlings actually have got to a good decent size, which they can contend with that. Now the roots won't be in the wood chip, they'll be below the wood chip, and the wood chip will just be acting as a mulch. But I want to have sturdier plants to actually do that. Now I have brought some sedums from home because they just grow no matter what you do to them. I've never had any issues with sedums, and in fact every time I pull some up and I leave them on the pavement to deal with later on, they've carried on growing till the next year. So I've brought some down just again because the amount of hoverflies and the insects that actually love that kind of thing, I thought the allotment could really do with that extra invitation to those insects. So I don't really want to walk over this clay soil too much. I'm going to be a little bit lazy. This soil is incredibly wet and heavy, and I've already got some weeds. Now this has been de-weeded, shall we say, but it's an exceptionally weedy area. So even with digging everything out, it really has affected it. Now this pretty much will be a mixed bed. And I think I actually have got some more gladioli bulbs in another bulb box that I've actually got. Now normally I'd put compost over the top of these bulbs so they get filled properly instead of this heavy clay soil. I have the same soil in my garden, but I'm already running out of compost with all the seedlings, and we used a lot of our compost this year for some new beds. So that's my gladioli. Now I may water them, but I want to have a look at the weather forecast. This ground's quite saturated. If they don't rot off, I'll have a beautiful display of some gladioli here. But you just never know. Our weather's just been so wet of late. You really do run a lot of risks, more so with bulbs. Now I have got more of a compost area that I will be planting into. I've got loads of pots that I've already got some soil in. And it will be little bit by little bit as I plant up this allotment. I'll probably end up moving some of the plants next year because, well, we don't always get it right. And I don't want to overly lose too much space for my vegetables and fruits. But I think adding these plants and flowers for the extra pollination and the insects, I think it will be a real beneficial thing. And losing a little bit of space to flowers and plants, things like that, I think that is definitely the actual way forward for us this year. So what are you guys actually planting in your allotment, flower-wise, ornamental-wise? What have you found to bring in so many bees, insects, or hopefully beneficial insects? We all know the marigold will distract a lot of insects from your fruits and vegetables. But has there been something else that you have found that has grown and did exceptionally well for your veg patch? Let me know in the comments, guys. But I'm going to get on and I'm going to rake this area because I'll be sowing my wild meadow flower seeds here very, very soon, within the next day or two, hopefully. Now, I like to start it off a little bit earlier because it's not going to damage those seedlings, and in fact most of them are annuals, if not all of them, and they're used to sitting in the soil all the way through the winter and germinating at the right time. So once I've got all this rubbish out of here, which is really shocking, get some of the bigger stones out, this bed will be ready for that scattering of wildflower seeds.